Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. You are entering the Stone Zone. You know, the greatest title that history can bestow is that of peacemaker. And President Donald Trump's historic trip to the Middle East is the beginning of what I think is the Trump doctrine, hopefully a new era of peace in the Middle East. Never mind the Great Reset, this is the Trump reset. President Trump making his first visit of his foreign visit of his second term here today in Saudi Arabia. Here's what he had to say.
In recent years, far too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. They loved using our very powerful military, and now it's really the most powerful it's ever been. We just are getting a budget approved, $1 trillion, highest budget we've ever had in history for military, $1 trillion. And we're getting the greatest missiles, the greatest weapons. And, you know, I hate to do it, but you have to do it because we believe in peace through strength. You have to have the strength, otherwise bad things could happen. But hopefully we'll never have to use any of those weapons. Seems to be an awfully big waste of money if you're never going to use them, but hopefully we'll never have to use them because the destructive power of some of those weapons are like nobody's seen before. I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America, and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. That's what I really want to do.
President Donald Trump abandoning the relentless drive for war that has dominated both parties in America for the last several decades of American politics, and returning to the fundamental principle of peace through strength, first fostered by Dwight Eisenhower, then by Ronald Reagan, now by President Donald Trump. It doesn't get any more America first than that. This is the official birth of the Trump doctrine. President Trump has reaffirmed the borders of Israel and their right to defend themselves from outside attacks. America and Israel will never again, however, enjoy a special friendship in which Israel takes advantage of the United States. And for those who were concerned that Israel had a disproportionate influence on American foreign policy, I believe that was dispelled today. President Trump and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appear to have been at an impasse over policy regarding a whole host of issues going forward. It's not just Gaza and the civilian deaths there, but also Syria's borders, the firefights with Turkey, and U.S.-led negotiations with Iran. While Netanyahu opposed the hostage release of Edan Alexander, a U.S. citizen, Trump and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who is doing a remarkable job, by the way, fought hard and received the American after more than 500 days of captivity. Netanyahu opposes direct talks between U.S. and Hamas, which Trump has insisted on using trusted patriots like Witkoff within the administration. All too much success, I might add. President Trump has also tried to bring Netanyahu to the table to negotiate with Turkey and the two countries fighting over controls of Syrian airspace. With no meaningful movement on Netanyahu's end, Trump may authorize the sale of new jets to Turkey. This will infuriate Israel as it reduces some of their military dominance advantage. The president has appointed Tom Barrack, one of his closest friends and a very able executive, as our U.S. ambassador to Turkey. In Saudi Arabia today, President Trump signed the largest defense sales agreement in U.S. history, nearly $142 billion, providing Saudi Arabia with state-of-the-art war-fighting equipment and services from over a dozen U.S. defense firms. Now, President Trump withdrew a prior requirement that obligated Saudi Arabia to fully normalize relations with Israel before proceeding with the arms sale, and President Trump also said that the Saudis could join the highly praised Abraham Accords, perhaps the greatest peacekeeping achievement of President Trump's first term, when they are ready and on their own timeline. Then, in a shocking announcement, President Trump said that it's time to give Syria a chance, and he shocked the audience by stating that he would lift all sanctions on Syria after discussing the matter with the Crown Prince. Let's listen to President Trump himself.
Among others, and friends of mine, people that I have a lot of respect for in the Middle East, I will be ordering the cessations against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
That was the standing ovation that President Trump received upon that announcement, yet another public rebuke of Netanyahu's demands on America. All of these policy decisions have been opposed by Netanyahu and his coalition wartime government. Internally, some are questioning if Israel might need to change course in order to find new advantages in this new world President Donald Trump is making. Frustrated by the lack of conclusion to the war in Gaza and Israel's inability to make nice with their U.S. partners in the Middle East, President Trump, like a lion, is forging a new path, an America First path for his country, our country, and for himself. As I said earlier, I call it the Trump Doctrine. At the same time, the president has recognized the humanitarian crisis going on right now in Gaza and had this shocking announcement.
When Gaza came up, and I said, we gotta be good to Gaza. Those people are suffering. We gotta be good to Gaza. We're gonna take care of that. There's a very big need for medicine, food and medicine, and we're taking care of it.
In terms of like opening up more access points, or
very hard.
Pushing the Israelis.
We are.
To open up more access
very
points.
Hard to get food and medicine into Gaza.
How did the Prime Minister respond to that?
Well, felt well about it.
So there you have it, another bold move by the president. Clearly, we are going to be airlifting food and medicine to those trapped in Gaza. So Israel will continue to be prioritized, but so will other partners like Saudi Arabia and Turkey when they stay on the same page as our country. And Trump is willing to allow countries like Iran, Qatar, and others demonstrate that they're ready to enter more constructive talks on the world stage. The president may, in fact, be turning the Middle East into what it was before the invasion of Iraq, a more multipolar region where several countries keep each other in check, less reliant on Israel's dominance, backed by American presence and American dollars. Instead, countries pay the United States and get to do business with us as long as they treat our ally Israel well. Now, there's much speculation that the president is going to recognize a Palestinian state. This is completely and totally unconfirmed. I, for one, do not believe these reports are accurate, but I'm only giving you my opinion. There's a lot of speculation. We left the politics and rhetoric, and President Trump is now changing the actual material situation in the Middle East. And he's not asking for permission, not from the deep state, not from Israel, not from anyone else in the Middle East. We pray, along with all Americans, for peace and for President Trump's success, as his mission is to put America first. I, for one, would not be shocked to see the president, who's already in Riyadh, jump over to Turkey where the Russians and the Ukrainians are scheduled to meet on Thursday for the beginning of peace talks to end that conflict. The only thing predictable about Donald J. Trump is that he is completely and totally unpredictable. I watched an amazing exchange between Bill O'Reilly and Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes after 60 Minutes had an incredible interview with Democrat lawyer Mark Elias. I know him well. He showed up at my trial demanding that the judge not release to my defense attorneys the so-called CrowdStrike's memo, which would have proved definitively that the claim that the Russians hacked the DNC, one of the foundational elements of the Russian collusion hoax, was categorically untrue. Of course, the judge would not release that document, and we would learn it only later when the head of CrowdStrike's, a man by the name of Sean Henry, testified under oath for the House Intelligence Committee. But Elias actually made much of the fact that President Donald Trump, he claims, is persecuting him, like New York Attorney General Letitia James says, he's out for revenge and retribution. That is categorically untrue. In fact, if you look at it historically, President Trump's predecessors, particularly Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy and his Attorney General brother Robert Kennedy, and Barack Obama created an unprecedented use of federal power to be used to stifle their critics and to harass their opponents. Franklin Roosevelt, during his time in office, deployed the IRS against individuals and organizations who he saw as threats to his New Deal policies. FDR also used the IRS to attack free press. He reportedly directed the IRS to audit the tax returns of newspaper publishers who voiced criticism of his socialist expansion of government. This tactic was not only a means of retribution, but also used to create a chilling effect against his critics. FDR used his immense clout to attack controversial radio commentator Father Charles Coughlin. Now, Coughlin has since been cast through the lens of history as a bigot and a demagogue, but in his day, Coughlin was one of the leading voices against U.S. involvement overseas, opposing involvement in World War II. He had been meeting with populist renegade Huey Long, was levying attacks against FDR to a very, very large national radio audience. FDR even had his postmaster general spy on Father Coughlin. And then, of course, the Kennedy brothers, their regime is viewed through rose-tinted glasses today due to the assassination of both men. But he and his brother similarly defied following, they were deified following their murders, but both men used and abused their authority to punish their critics. During the Kennedy administration, the FBI committed some of the most famous surveillance abuses. As you might recall, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover authorized extensive wiretaps on civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King. In fact, Dr. King was wiretapped by the Kennedy Justice Department upon the strict and explicit approval of Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So retribution has a long history in American politics, but in all honesty, it was the Obama and Biden administrations who engaged in the abuse of power that was known as the Russian collusion hoax, and Donald Trump has been restrained in this regard. You're listening to The Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be back with more of the Stone Cold Truth, so whatever you do, don't touch that dial, as we'll be right back.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. This is The Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
To The Stone Zone, we were talking about the abuse of power by various presidents against their political opponents and critics. Let me point out that it is no coincidence that after losing the presidency by an eyelash in 1960, Richard Nixon was subjected to a random IRS audit of his personal income taxes in 1961, 1962, and 1963 until President Kennedy felt the unfortunate cold touch of the magic bullet in Dallas. In the meantime, breaking news today, the Biden administration claims to have added almost 400,000 jobs from July through September of last year, but new data released this week suggests that actually none of those jobs ever really existed. If you'd listened to the economic guru Barry Habib here in the Stone Zone, he told you this in numerous interviews. Despite constantly gaslighting by the mainstream media, Americans knew the economy was in poor shape, and these latest numbers released today prove it. Month after month, the government bean counters under former President Biden published overly optimistic estimates for everything from job growth to the size of the economy, only to then have those numbers routinely and quietly revised down later. So every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics produces estimates for the number of non-farm payrolls in the country, as well as revisions for the last 2 months' estimates. Under Biden, these revisions were abnormal in magnitude and direction, being revised down with unusual frequency. You see, it was all about creating a narrative and optics for politics, for re-election. While the monthly job reports were compiled from a survey of over 600,000 businesses, of which fewer than 200,000 were actually surveyed, the Bureau of Labor Statistics fudged the numbers month after month to create that narrative for Joe Biden's re-election, a re-election which never happened. Coming up on the other side, we're going to talk about President Trump's historic breakthrough with a trade announcement announced by his Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent went to Geneva to work out a new trade deal with the Chinese. Actually, it wasn't a new trade deal. It was a trade deal that had actually been put in place in the final days of Donald Trump's first term, but then abandoned by the Biden administration and therefore ignored by the Chinese. Joining us coming up, Gordon Chang, an old China hand who has lived and worked in Shanghai and Hong Kong for almost 2 decades. He's written a great new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He's going to give us a critique of that trade deal and tell us what's going on inside communist China. So whatever you do, don't go away. Don't touch that dial. You'll be right back in the Stone Zone in no time.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back in the Stone Zone. Joining me now is an old China hand. Gordon Chang has lived and worked in Shanghai and Hong Kong for almost 2 decades. He is a columnist who has written regularly for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, National Review, Barron's, and many other publications. He's the author of several books. His most recent book, a must-read, Plan Red, America's Project to Destroy America, which is now available on Amazon. Always glad to have him. Gordon Chang, welcome into the Stone Zone.
Well, thank you so much, Roger.
I saw a great interview that you gave with my friend Grant Stritchfield last night at Real America's Voice, which is why I reached out to you. You have been an articulate critic of the trade deal that President Trump and Secretary Bessent announced the framework for yesterday, writing, you say the Chinese let the president have a temporary win in order to pave the way for a more comprehensive deal. You point out that this is Trump, the optimist, at work, but you think ultimately cooperation with an arrogant Xi Jinping is not possible. Tell us what you mean, Gordon.
Well, first of all, when you look at the trade deal, the effect, it certainly helps China's exporters far more than America's exporters. So it is a win for the Chinese, but it's a small one. And of course, it's a temporary one because the trade arrangement only lasts for 90 days. What Trump has said yesterday when he was speaking from the White House was that he did not intend to hurt China's factories, but they indeed are ailing, and that he would like a comprehensive agreement with China, which China promised. So I think what's happening is that President Trump, yes, he gave China, let them off the hook, but he did that intentionally. And I also think that he is doing it for the long-term benefit in the way he looks at the Chinese and the American economies. So he didn't cave in, as a lot of people are saying. He's not afraid of inflation. He's not afraid of bare shelves. He did it because he thinks it's in everybody's long-term best interest. Now, I don't necessarily think he's going to get the deal that he wants after 90 days, but he's the president, and that's his view, that he will be able to succeed.
How stable is the situation on the ground in China? We Americans, I think, have a imagery of a brutal regime keeping everyone in line, but are there political factions? Is there instability in China today?
Yes. I don't think that Xi Jinping is as strong politically as everybody thinks. We know that there is turbulence in the Chinese military. For instance, Xi Jinping's number one loyalist in the People's Liberation Army, a guy named General He Weidong, has not been seen in public since March 11th. Now, most people say that Xi Jinping sacked his own guy, but it's more likely from what we know that Xi Jinping's adversaries sacked General He. And really what we're talking about is the most important political faction in the Chinese military. We've also seen a lot of signs of instability among China's civilians. And of course, Chinese people are protesting in the streets because they've lost jobs, because they're not getting their back pay, and because they're not being able to get money out of banks. So this is not a good situation for the Communist Party. And although it's able to maintain control through most periods, if the situation gets worse in the Chinese economy, the Communist Party is going to have a real problem hanging on.
That is very interesting. Folks, once again, I recommend to you Gordon Chang's new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. It's available today on Amazon. I read your previous books, China's Going to War, The Great U.S.-China Tech War, Losing South Carolina, Nuclear Showdown, North Korea, all great works by Gordon Chang. Gordon, what should the president's ultimate aim be in regard to tariffs on China?
I'd like to see a decoupling of the U.S. and China. We heard the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent yesterday talk about this on CNBC, where he said we need a strategic decoupling. In other words, for strategic goods. I'd like to see a broader decoupling because we shouldn't be putting money into the hands of the Chinese regime, which just uses that money to assault and attack us. But clearly, the Trump administration does not want to be reliant on China for important things like medicines, computer chips, and all the rest of it. And that's one of the reasons why President Trump has gotten a lot of foreign investment for plants in the United States. So, for instance, TSMC, the Taiwan chip maker, is building something like 6 fabs in Arizona near Phoenix. That's a great story for the U.S., and we need to continue to do that because we can't rely on China for anything that we absolutely need.
I was watching your X feed and saw you hailing the developments in the Middle East, specifically dropping the outdated sanctions on Syria. Indeed, as I said earlier on this show, this is the beginning of the Trump doctrine, a complete reset in the Middle East. Given China's relationship with Iran, Iran is essentially a client state of the Communist Chinese. How do the Chinese react to these developments in the Middle East?
Yeah, President Trump just announced the lifting of sanctions on Syria a few hours ago, so we haven't seen any official Chinese reaction, but I'm sure they're not happy at all, because what China has been trying to do is to take over the new Syrian government by flooding it with money. But the new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, who, by the way, is a former militant, wants the United States to become the most influential country in Syria. He wants American money. He wants American investment, wants trade. He doesn't want the American military, by the way. He doesn't want aid. What he really wants is for the United States. He wants to replicate the American system in Syria. If he's as good as his word, and there are indications that he is, then this means the United States can stabilize a very critical part of the world, and it means that American business will follow.
We had Colonel Douglas Macgregor on the show the other day, and he expressed a view that Chairman Xi is uneasy about the capabilities of the Chinese military, that he is not anxious to test them. Do you share that view?
Yes. There's been a lot of reporting that the Chinese weapons don't work as well as they're advertised. And just as I mentioned, we know that Xi Jinping's control over the military is not as tight as people portray it to be. So I'm not sure that Xi Jinping is confident that if he gives an order to the generals and admirals that they'll follow it. There's a lot of, the capabilities of the Chinese military, big topic, but you got to remember it's a communist military, which means it has two lines of reporting, one military and one political. That's no way to run a war, Roger, and I'm sure Xi Jinping understands that. So I believe that Macgregor is absolutely right about that.
As you know, one of President Richard Nixon's great accomplishments was getting a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Russians. He succeeded in doing that really by driving a wedge between the Russians and the Chinese. Although both were communist nations, they had a long history of hostility, a long common border. They were not natural allies. In fact, they were deeply suspicious of each other. The one thing Joe Biden seems to have accomplished was driving the Russians and the Chinese together. Do you think President Trump can be successful in driving them apart?
I don't think so. I think that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have been too close for too long. And the reason is they see the world in the same terms. They identify the same interests, and they think they've got the same enemy, which is the United States. Vladimir Putin is very important to Xi Jinping and vice versa. So I don't think that it is very likely to be able to split the two apart. It would be nice to think that we can do that, but it would be extraordinarily difficult. And there are other ways to accomplish what we set out to do. You know, Richard Nixon's accomplishments were historic in getting Moscow and Beijing apart, but they were already squabbling with each other when Nixon did that. Nixon was smart enough to understand what was going on between the two and to exploit it. But right now, we don't have that same situation. Moscow and Beijing are on the same page.
Very interesting. So one of the major issues that I see in this country, of course, is the Chinese buying up hundreds of thousands of acres of prime ranch land, farmland, but also public utilities like toll roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, harbors. And this goes unimpeded. In Florida, for example, Governor Ron DeSantis announced that he would pass state law that would prohibit the Chinese or anybody fronting for them from buying land in the Sunshine State. But when you read the small print, what the law actually did was prohibit the Chinese from buying any land that was contiguous to a quote-unquote national security site, whatever that means. You have written quite a bit about the infiltration into all strata of U.S. society, including owning huge swaths of valuable real estate. How deep is the Chinese infiltration in the United States?
It is pervasive. It is every institution. And I'll just give you an example. The first time that the Ministry of State Security contacted Eric Swalwell was not when he was on the House Intelligence Committee, where, of course, he'd be of great benefit for China, but it was when he was on the City Council of Dublin City, California. And I'm not saying Swalwell did anything wrong, but what I'm saying is that the Chinese, if they identified somebody so young in his career, there must be dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of Swalwells. In other words, people who have been contacted by Ministry of State Security. This is just top to bottom, Roger. And that's why it's so important for you to talk about these things, because we've got to get the Chinese out of our society, because they're here to do us no good. This is a mortal threat to the security and even the existence of the United States.
You cover this extremely well in your most recent book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, which I note again is available right now on Amazon. That's by Gordon Chang, our guest here today. Gordon, the Chinese have these police stations across the country in which they are monitoring, theoretically at least, their own Chinese citizens who are in the United States. I'm not certain why we continue to allow this. The singer Jimmy Levy, the gospel singer, who's a friend, because of some contacts he said, told me that he learned he was under extensive surveillance, that he was literally being followed. He believed that his phone was also tapped. Why do we put up with this, and what should we do about it?
Well, I don't know the why, but we certainly should not put up with it. The FBI a couple of years ago closed the Chinese police station in Chinatown, New York. But according to the Daily Caller and New York Post reporting, there are 7 to 9 remaining Chinese police stations on our soil. And there very well could be more. What we're seeing are Ministry of State Security agents and Chinese diplomats engaging in acts which are inimical to our security. We can turf these people out, or we can imprison them. And we absolutely have to do that, because they not only monitor, but they coerce not only Chinese nationals, but American citizens of Chinese descent. So we know that, for instance, in the state of New York, especially the city of New York, a lot of Chinese American organizations have very close contact with the Chinese consulate, but also with the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, which is the part of the party that subverts foreign governments. So, yes, we got to get them out of our country, because if we don't, we will have a very large fifth column here, and we have got to get them out.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Gordon Chang. He's an old China hand, author of the new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. When we come back, I'm going to ask Gordon Chang about the prospects for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, something the Chinese have been rattling the saber about for some time, something I thought was highly likely under Joe Biden. I want to see if he agrees with me that it is now far less likely under President Donald Trump. You're tuned in to the Stone Zone. We're talking to Gordon Chang. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, because you'll be back in the Stone Zone in just a few minutes.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone. This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Back into the Stone Zone, we're talking to Gordon Chang. He has lived and worked in Shanghai and Hong Kong for almost 2 decades, a columnist for Newsweek, The Hill, The Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and many others, writing about China. You can find him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon G. Chang on X. He has a very lively and informative Twitter feed, X feed. Urge you to follow him and to check it out. The question I asked before we went to break, I thought it was highly likely, given the defensive policies of the Biden administration, that the Chinese would invade Taiwan, would take Taiwan, because I think they probably knew all they would have gotten from the Biden administration was probably a strong letter of protest. Now, under Donald Trump, Gordon, what are the chances, in your opinion, that the Chinese will make a move to invade and take Taiwan, which, of course, they continue to insist is rightfully theirs?
Yeah. I don't think that the Chinese will start hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. And the reason is for what we talked about before, and that is the Chinese military is not ready. I don't think Xi Jinping trusts it. And also, the military doesn't really want to fight. But that doesn't mean Taiwan is safe. And the reason is we know that in the last month, China has been engaged in some very provocative activities against South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Australia. If one of these incidents goes wrong, I think there will be a general war in East Asia. And if there's a general war in East Asia, China will move on Taiwan. So the point is we got to prevent an incident from flaring up. And the way to do that is to be strong, as President Trump is, to exhibit, to say that we will protect our friends and allies, and to scare the Chinese off. If we do that, we have a chance of peace. And by the way, I think that essentially, the Chinese did not invade Taiwan during the previous administration. And I think you're right. They weren't afraid of Biden, but they were afraid of internal reasons, and that's what kept them from invading.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Gordon Chang. You can follow Gordon Chang on X, formerly known as Twitter. He's at Gordon G. Chang there, Gordon G. Chang. He has a very lively X feed. You had something which I really liked. You said you could help defund China's regime by telling your broker to sell all mutual funds with Chinese or Hong Kong shares. Illuminate us on that, if you would, Gordon.
Yeah, a lot of people say, well, what can I do to stop China? Well, there's things that we all can do. One of them is that when we have a choice not to buy Chinese goods, buy American-made or buy someplace else, but not China. And the other thing is, of course, to talk to our brokers and say, look, we don't want to hold any Chinese stocks. Most people will say, I don't hold any Chinese stocks. But they do hold mutual funds in many cases. And many mutual funds are international in scope, and the international mutual funds almost always have Chinese and Hong Kong stocks. There are funds which are ex-China, ex-Hong Kong, and those are the ones that tell your broker, those are the ones you want. Matter of fact, the Chinese equities don't perform very well anyway, so you're doing yourself a favor from a point of view of making money. But the point is, making money or not, it's not good to fund the Chinese regime.
All right. I want to thank our guest, Gordon G. Chang. Again, he is the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, which is available now at Amazon. You can also follow Gordon Chang at Gordon G. Chang on X, formerly known as Twitter, where he has a very, very lively and informative feed. Gordon, thank you so much for making the time for us today and for entering the Stone Zone.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. I really appreciate it.
And for our Stone Zone listeners out there, until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the Stone Cold Truth, whether it is politics, news, history, style, culture, or food. You can always find it right here in the Stone Zone. Au revoir.
The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.